Hello, my name is Donald Hutera, and welcome back to, or for the first time, Dementia Discussions, an initiative of Hackney and City Carers Center. I'm here today with Helena Thornley, who is, I just found out, an SLT.
I am indeed. Speech and language therapist. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. So where do you work currently?
So I work for the Adult Community Rehab Team, which is a Hackney-based community rehab team. So we've got speech therapists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and we work with a wide range of people with lots of different conditions all over Hackney.
And how long have you been doing that for Hackney, and how long have you been in the field generally? Just curious.
Yeah, so I've been doing it for Hackney for about 4 years, and I've been in the field for just a bit longer than that.
And what drew you to this?
To speech and language therapy?
Yeah.
Well, as a child, I had speech and language therapy, so I was always aware of them. And I think growing up, I graduated, went to a job in London, and was just really amazed about the importance of communication in absolutely every interaction that I was having. And I think I just therefore found myself meeting speech therapists, talking to people about it as a career, and just ended up thinking, actually, it's a really worthwhile and interesting thing to go into.
And are you dealing with people who are not just people with dementia, but all sorts of people who have issues with speech and language therapy needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have people that have maybe had strokes on our caseloads. We have people that have grown up with a developmental issue that's affected how they communicate, like cerebral palsy, some of the progressive conditions like Parkinson's, motor neuron disease. And also the other part of our job is that we see people that have difficulties with their eating and drinking too. I guess because when we train, we learn about this bit. So we also go in and offer advice about swallowing difficulties too. So that is relevant for people with dementia as well.
By the way, my mother had a stroke, and then she developed aphasia.
Yeah.
And the way, what nobody advised me in the nursing home that she was in the United States how to communicate with her, but I just sort of figured that I had to learn her language, if that makes sense. I had to figure out what she was trying to say to me. And yeah, it was like learning a different way of speaking to somebody.
Absolutely. And we work with a lot of people with aphasia, and often it's about kind of working with families to say, look, they have these difficulties now, but you need to sort of meet them halfway and start listening to what they're saying and how they're saying it. What's their face saying? What does that also tell you about what they're saying? The word might not necessarily make sense, but can you interpret it some way? Can you match those dots? Can you connect it?
And so how, without needing to go into percentages, a lot of your work also involves carers, family members, et cetera, concerned people around the people who need the therapy. It's also working with them quite closely.
Absolutely. So we would just go into someone's house and kind of work out what's that person's main priority. So is it, okay, they really want to work on 10 words that are going to allow them to go into the shop and buy what they want. Okay, we'll work on that. Or for that person, is it, right, well, me and my son are having problems because I'm trying to say this, it's not quite coming out right. He's getting really angry at me, and helping them problem solve that, kind of to make a bit of a more positive interaction for them. So not aiming for perfection, not aiming for perfect speech or perfect whatever, but just helping families and people to kind of muddle through and keep those interactions going.
To keep the channels open.
Yeah, exactly.
And is most of what you do, or quite a large part of it, in people's homes?
So I work for a community team at the moment, so all my work is in people's homes. But previously I've worked in a rehab unit for people that just had a brain injury, so they come and live there for a couple of months, and also in stroke units, and also just in the hospital wards is another area that you'd find speech therapists too. So you do slightly different things based on where you are, but I've been working in the community now for a while, and I love it.
I'm curious, is it all one-to-one? Do you use any sort of charts or writing stuff down? I'm saying this because I'm a writer, but I just wondered how much is what we're doing now versus you putting words on boards or something. Do you do any of that?
A lot of that. So there's something called total communication, which basically just means anything goes. And for a lot of our people with aphasia or people with dementia, it's about saying, okay, so you can't find the right word to say. What can you do? Can you draw a picture? Can you write it down? Can you get a bit of the word down? Can you show them with your face? Can you do a gesture? Can you point? You know, I was reading something the other day that said that 70% of communication is completely non-verbal. So you don't say anything. So actually, I think that's a big thing for the dementia population to think about too with families. If you're thinking they're struggling to tell me how they feel, well, what are they showing you?
And that's by observing body language,
exactly.
facial
are they really
signals.
tense? Exactly. And also your intonation, so how you say something. You know, I might have a patient that perhaps had a stroke that can say absolutely nothing, but through his intonation, his voice going up and down, he's able to tell you whether he's angry, whether he's happy, whether he finds something funny, whether you can be sarcastic with your tone of voice, you can be empathetic with your tone of voice. So it's kind of training people to use what they've got.
Well, all of this we've been talking about will segue very nicely into the set of 10 questions that we've received that we'll go through one by one. And looking over them this morning, I found some of them quite poignant.
Absolutely, me too.
Because of obviously the struggles that people are having about better communication, which is what you're here for today.
Yeah, hopefully I can be of some use, I hope.
So, number one.
Yeah.
I think my mum is developing dementia. I want to talk to her about it, but I'm worried that it will upset her. How should I start this conversation and let her know that I'm here to support her? What would you say to this query?
So I think the first thing I thought when I was reading through this question was just how natural it is to feel worried about having this conversation and not really sure where to go. And I think that often those thoughts are really, really common in people who are starting to notice signs in their parents. And I think it's really good that you're asking the question and that you're out and that this person is out there seeking the answers. I think that's a really positive way to be. I guess when I was thinking about communication, I was thinking about how would you normally communicate with your mother? Would you normally just go up to her and ask her something? Or would you normally get her opinion and see what's going on? I think that often when people develop a long-term condition, people think that their communication needs to change loads. But actually, how would you have always talked to her about these things? And I wondered possibly about whether to not go in there straight away with the fear of dementia, but just to open the conversation, ask her, has she noticed anything? Is there anything that's worrying her? Because probably there are things that are worrying her as well, the mother that she's spotted. So opening the conversation and then using that to say, look, should we maybe go and seek some advice? Should we go to the doctor, ask for a referral to a memory clinic? Should we look at support groups if it feels really emotional for all of them there? And just kind of get that dialogue. And I think she said that she really wanted to tell her mum that she wanted to support her. And I think, tell your mum that you want to support her. I think that's really great. And it sounds like she's being really supportive anyway.
So it would be perhaps an awkward situation.
Yeah.
Approach it with as much of a relaxed, normal flow of communication as you had in the past, and just broach an issue, which can be tricky, of course.
Of course, absolutely. And I think that if it does feel difficult, you don't have to go in there with, I think you have dementia. You can go in there with, have you noticed these little things? I just wondered about this. I just wondered about that. And see what happens and see if the person pushes back, or does have the person notice things that they want to talk about as well, and see if you can support them to kind of go for further assessments and all those things.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense.
Right.
Number two, my dad lives in a care home, and whenever I go to visit him, he says he wants to go home. I keep on telling him that he is home, and he gets upset with me. I, in turn, get angry. How can I respond to him in a way that makes him understand and not get upset?
So this is a really tough question, I think. And I read this and thought, I can so understand how frustrating that this must be mutually for both of them. And I think that it's one of these really common things that you get with people with dementia that they might ask the same questions about something that they've forgotten about. They might have had difficulty retaining that piece of information. And it can absolutely happen that happens over and over again and can be very frustrating. And I thought here the topic is particularly frustrating. I want to go home. And I thought that actually for a son or a daughter, making a decision about your parent going into a care home is incredibly difficult. So having that person bringing back that topic again and again must be really upsetting. And so I think the first thing I kind of wanted to say was just to make sure that the person, the son or the daughter, is having their own space, is that they're looking after themselves, is that they're taking a break, is that they are accessing all of the support that is in places like this, and that they are kind of going for a bit of a little and often approach, not just putting themselves in that situation all the time, which can be really, really frustrating. And I guess with how to deal with it, there are a couple of different things that they could try. I guess it depends on how distressing it is. One of the things could be to try and validate how that person is feeling. Say, yeah, I know you want to go home. You're here at the moment. What is it that you like about here? And kind of redirecting the conversation and moving the conversation on. What is it that you like about here? I quite like going and sitting down here. Let's go and sit here. Let's go and look in whatever room, and redirecting it to that. And also thinking that often people are trying to communicate something. So yeah, he might have forgotten the fact that this is now where he lives. But what's the dad trying to communicate? Is he trying to communicate that he feels a bit unsafe or quite unsure of where he is, and perhaps some of his personal possessions aren't there? And are there more personal possessions that you could get there? Could we work on getting the environment more familiar to him? Or is it that maybe he needs to feel more useful? So are there things that he could get involved with that could be more stimulating for him? So I guess there's different things. There's responding in the moment, and you could respond with, this is your home, you live here, and it may well lead to an argument. Or you could maybe try and redirect the conversation away from it, and then think about maybe what's he trying to communicate here.
Because there may be underlying anxieties, so getting at the source of those gently. And it's you said redirect, I would have said indirect, but it is redirecting. It's making the situation positive, since this is the home, finding the positives, and also being reassuring, I guess.
I guess so, yeah.
And patient.
Yeah.
With your father, your family member, and yourself.
Totally. And I think the whole patience thing is really, really important here, because the person that's asking when am I going home or whatever has probably not made the connection that they live there now. So actually what their question is when do I get to go back to my old house where I lived for 20 years or a long time? So actually maybe it's more of a validation of the fact that, yeah, this is where you are right now. We had so many good memories in that house. Let's talk about them. Let's look at some pictures. Let's enjoy talking about those things. But I'd also point out here about, and I know this is really, really difficult, non-verbals that we were talking about at the beginning, that if the person with dementia is not really understanding their situation, is not really holding on to the information that you're saying to them, they get a lot of information from non-verbals and are actually really, really good at using them. So if you look really stressed and really anxious and really upset every time this is raised, because it is a stressful topic of conversation, they're probably going to react by getting more stressed and more anxious. So I would just kind of try and see whether, I know it's difficult, but you can appear a bit more relaxed in that situation and see if that makes it easier to navigate.
I know when family members just in general were arguing, I would sometimes say, in ever the mediator, which is my role, just relax with each other. You don't, because sometimes the emotions get in the way. And it's almost, it can be, I would guess, sometimes beneficial to detach a bit from heightened emotion, especially what could be construed as negative heightened emotion, because it's not going to help the situation.
No, and I guess it's thinking about what is the point of your interaction, of your conversation, isn't it? So is the point that you desperately need him to understand that fact, Or is the point to have a nice time and a nice interaction with each other? And if the point is the latter, then actually moving the conversation on, keeping it a bit more relaxed, may be helpful, may be beneficial. Oh, another thing I thought I would say that has just come to my mind is actually, if you can have a bit more of an open dialogue with the person about why you keep coming back, depends what level he's at, why you keep coming back to this issue of going home, you might be able to write down together a little bit of a script together, both of you, in those kind of lucid moments that you sometimes get. You might be able to write down, you moved from this house, you moved here because of this, you've been living here for this amount of months, with some pictures, and you could have that there, and perhaps the carers or other people that are involved with him, if he asked that question, you could talk that through with him again, and that might be a slightly less confronting way. It just pops into my head.
So it's a written and visual touchstone in a way that others can use as well, who may be looking after the family member or the relation.
Exactly, and if you can write it in their words, all the better, because it's a lot more meaningful.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
You're good.
Oh, I'm not sure. Think some words that come into my head.
Spontaneous. You're good at spontaneity. So number 3, my understanding is that people with dementia have a different perception of time than I do. Is it useful to focus any kind of talk on their immediate needs or the past or both? And what is also useful to know regarding how to negotiate those different time frames? Does that make sense?
This is a really interesting question. I think it definitely is something that comes up a lot, actually, in conversation. And I think the answer would just be both. It just depends on what you want. If you're wanting to have a conversation about what you want for dinner or what they want for their birthday, then keeping it in the here and now is great and really important. And in those situations, it's thinking about how you can help them to understand. So can you give them really short, can you ask them really, really short, simple questions? Can you give them a choice? Show them objects if you need to. If it's dinner time, could you get them involved with the process of making the dinner so that they understand that they're going to be eating soon, so that they can see you cooking? So, right, we'll be eating soon. That might help them to stay in the immediate time frame. But then at other times, if you're having a conversation and you want to reminisce, then that's lovely and really nice. And things like photo albums, you could even have a family tree, a timeline of when things happen, can all be kind of helpful catalysts to help your conversation move forward. But I would say that you don't need to be, note, today is this date, this is it, you need to remember this date and test them, because often that can be really confusing and quite distressing. So I think it's about thinking, what do they need to know at this time, and what can we let go to have a positive and successful interaction with each other?
So being sensitive to the moment and realizing that time for everybody is fluid, and to go with that flow.
Exactly. And also to listen to yourself, to, if you're finding it really frustrating to be having those conversations, and perhaps you might have had the same conversation lots of times, then send in the cavalry, send someone else in your place, or think, I'm not there today. Today I need to look after myself. And I think that's also important to do.
And I'm really glad that you've brought up at least twice now the what I call carer's syndrome, where the stress, the responsibility becomes quite heavy.
Absolutely.
And you lose the ability to look after yourself as well as you should. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be less effective for the person you're meant to be caring for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You've said it perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, number 4, my other half, OH, I just learned what OH meant today, has recently been diagnosed with mixed dementia, vascular, and Alzheimer's. He's been seen by the consultant who talked of memory problems and said Alzheimer's in such a weird way. I don't think he heard it. I'm sure my other half is aware that things are not right, as he occasionally says he's going crackers. The consultant believes DVLA won't allow him to drive, so we have not let him drive since February. He asks most days when he can drive again, and I always give some vague excuse. Should I tell my other half that he has dementia, or is it best not to? I'm at a total loss.
So I read this question and I thought so number one, see how a consultant could have said Alzheimer's in a really weird way that he missed. But I can also see how the family are kind of going back and forth, not really knowing what's the right way to do. And I think that's what's the right thing to do. And I think that's really natural. I guess the thing that stuck out to me here was the fact that he's saying sometimes that he's going crackers. So maybe use the next time he goes crackers, he says he's going crackers, as a bit of a litmus test to see where he's at. To say, what do you think's making you crackers? What have you noticed? What have you understood from that? And see actually what the kind of things he's noticed, because that might lead your conversation quite naturally on to you being able to say, well, we went to this meeting and this was said, but it was said in a bit of a weird way. How are you doing? And kind of catch up about it. And I think that putting the ball in his court, giving him ownership of it and control over it might be helpful. What we don't know from the question is whether he's going to be able to retain that information and whether he's going to be able to remember that fact. So I think that sometimes you might have to give a vague answer and move on from it. And I guess what we don't know here is how he responds to that. Do you, the person that wrote the question, feel quite tense in that situation? Does he get tense and upset? Or are you able to redirect the conversation quite nicely on? Because if you're able to redirect the conversation and move on to something else, that's okay too. I think you don't need to confront somebody with a diagnosis every single time they ask for something, because that might be quite distressing. But there may be situations where you can, and he's able to deal with it.
Well, that question of should I tell my other half, or whoever, gee, you've got dementia, or how much does that get addressed in your work, and how common are those concerns about naming? It's like the elephant in the room. Hey, this is the fact. This is what it's called. This is what you've got. Is that again taking your cues from the person?
Totally. It's completely unique. I think for some people, they think, yes, finally, these are the things that I've been experiencing. Finally, you're putting a name onto it. And that is so empowering for that person. And they think, okay, right, that's it. That's why I'm going crackers. That's it. But for other people, that's terrifying. And that's something they don't want to associate with themselves. So I think it is taking the cue from the person and exploring that with them. Right, well, you said you were crackers. What kind of things have you noticed? I've noticed this, and starting that back and forth dialogue and seeing how relaxed it feels. If it feels relaxed, then it might be a thing that you can say.
And the specifics, the details of feelings or of anything can be useful, because it helps people move on to the next thing and the next thing, and
totally.
Possibly the bigger picture as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it just depends where he's at. If he can take that on and remember that piece of information, that might help with the interactions about the driving. If not, you might need to employ some of the things that we were talking about in the previous question, when we were talking about the guy that says regularly that he wants to go home.
Yeah.
So it might be writing down those things together so that you've got a bit of a script that you can use,
sure.
Redirecting him when you can, talking about driving experiences that he's done in the past, things like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
Right.
Excellent. 5, my wife and I have been together for 50 years, and she's been diagnosed with dementia. It progressed really quickly. She's lost all interest in everything she loved doing. Sometimes she asks me if I'm her dad, and yet other days everything is normal. Recently, she started to speak regularly to a little girl who isn't there, and asked me several times to keep the dog out of the house. We've never had a dog. How do I go about telling her that these things she's seeing aren't there?
I think when I was reading this, I really noticed how, well, one of the most difficult things for the loved ones of people with dementia can be seeing that fluctuation. So some days she seems okay, and then other days she's thinking I'm her dad, and that can be really distressing, having to have great days and then go through the bad days all over again. And I would kind of reiterate the point here that we've made about making sure that you do have time for yourself, and that can seem really a lot. So making sure that you do have time on your own. I guess with dementia, what I would say is, so there are lots of different reasons why people could be seeing things that aren't real. Sometimes they can be because the brain doesn't perceive what the object is as well as it once did. So you might look at that plant and the brain might not send the message that that's a plant. So that kind of morphs into something else in your brain. That can happen. It can also happen that people have hallucinations as different types of dementia. So I guess what is really important though is the response. Is she distressed about it or is she not distressed about it? So if she's distressed about it, I'd be recommending things like staying there with her, making sure she's calm, reassuring her that she's all right, reassuring her that she's safe, and perhaps getting her to explain what it is that she's seeing to you so that you can use her language back to her to say, so you're at home, you're here, you're safe, you're with me. But I don't know that you necessarily need to say, these things aren't real, they're all in your head, because to the person with dementia, they seem real. They seem completely real. So that's kind of what to do if it's distressing. If it's not distressing, I'd maybe just be thinking a bit more about what you could do with the environment to reduce them. If you distract her and talk about something else, do they go away? Or are they still there? Or can you make sure that all the lights in the room are really switched on really well so that there's no shadows? Because they kind of can be things that can lead to seeing things.
Sure.
Or also, can you get rid of some of the, if there's clutter in the room, can you declutter? Because often it can be little bits and bobs in the room that can kind of morph into something else.
Because it's a trigger.
Exactly, yeah, because you can't quite work out what it is. So your brain just switches it into something else. So can you do a little bit of spring cleaning and declutter? That might improve it as well.
I've got a sort of off-book question, which is the importance of humor.
Oh gosh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Because laughter has to be a part of a positive part of,
totally.
Working with, living with people with dementia, as it does with all people and all aspects of life, I think.
I'm really glad you brought that up, absolutely.
But sometimes even, it's like what I have cancer patients who make jokes about cancer, or I mean, finding, it might sometimes be grim fun or ironic, but finding fun in difficult situations alleviates.
Absolutely. And also, interestingly, sometimes it can turn what has been something quite nasty into something quite positive, but just by your mood. If you're feeling good about your situation, it can make something that you're seeing be a lot nicer than if you're feeling negative. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. And just take your lead from them. If you're not laughing at the person, but if you can inject some humor into a situation, I think that's brilliant.
I've got a friend in Minnesota, which is where I'm from, who said that she had a friend whose parents had a kind of, they were in a mutual, they were in a home together, and they thought all the time that they were on a cruise.
Oh, brilliant.
And somehow they'd managed, maybe they were so simpatico with each other, and they were so happy to be there. And I've thought about, I'm mentioning it to you because, if that's a kind of delusion, it seems like a really positive delusion. And could be a lot of fun.
True, absolutely. You do see that in some care homes too, because people might say, I'm in a hotel. Excuse me, I'm just going to get the waitress to grab you a cup of tea, kind of thing. And they find that maybe easier to deal with than, I'm in a care home. I don't live in that house anymore. They're just, I'm in a hotel, a nice fancy 5-star hotel.
By the way, do you know a James Stewart movie called Harvey, which is where James Stewart has an imaginary rabbit? It's not necessarily about dementia or anything, but he goes around and I haven't seen it in years, but the family wants to have him committed because they think he's crackers.
Yeah.
But for him, that rabbit is very real.
Yeah.
So anyway, Harvey, 1950.
We'll all look it up.
Now, moving on. Question number 7. Question number 6. What cannot be taken for granted about what can be understood by the person you're talking with? Or is that very much individual based? How do you know you're communicating well and effectively without being patronizing?
This is a big question that often we get. I guess you would know someone is understanding you by taking a good hard look at their non-verbals. So, do they have a blank face? Are they nodding along? Are they giving you responses that seem appropriate and that are related to what you're saying. If you say, can you grab this for me from the kitchen? They go to the kitchen and they grab what you want. They'd be the kind of things that you'd know that person is, ways to know that person is understanding. I guess you can't really take for granted where someone is at, because everyone has maybe a slightly different diagnosis or is at a slightly different level of severity. And it's just about giving as much to support the communication as you possibly can. So there are some kind of key ways that I was going to mention that are really good at supporting someone's understanding. Should I do that now? Is that relevant?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. If you think it's relevant, it's relevant.
I think it is relevant, yeah. So the first one is just to make sure that the environment is as good as possible. So reduce distractions, make sure that TVs are switched off. If there's lots of you in the room, only one of you talks at once. That's the first thing. The second one I'd say is get people to get their attention. If you want them to be able to understand, they need to know that you're the one that's talking to them. So get their attention physically, tap them, make sure you've got their eye contact, say their name if you need to, make sure that you're both in the same pain, you're both looking at each other, ready to go. And then introduce your topic. Introduce what you're going to talk about. So, this funny thing happened at work. You're now talking about work. You're giving them an anchor of something to talk about. And then talk about that thing. Don't move on to something else. Keep talking about work until you're done with work. And if you feel that they may have lost concentration a bit, remind them where you're up to. Tell them we're on work. That's what we're talking about at the moment. And just go back and forth like that. Keep it simple. Keep your questions simple if you're asking questions. And if they don't look like they're understanding you, don't just repeat the same question over and over again. Rephrase it. And I think that if you do it like that, it won't be patronizing. What happens when it's patronizing is people tend to talk really loudly, is one thing that happens. People also tend to talk really slowly. And talking slowly is important because we know in dementia people process information more slowly. So talking slowly and giving pauses is important.
But it doesn't have to be exaggerated.
But it doesn't need to be exaggerated. Exactly. It can just be natural. So I think as long as you're doing those things to help their understanding as much as possible, then it doesn't need to be patronizing. It can just be supportive. Even though it may feel slightly awkward for you that you're having to put those parameters on conversation, it can be really helpful.
Because it's all about, communication is about clarity and amongst other things.
Exactly.
It's about being clear about what you're saying and being clear about what you're perceiving.
Exactly.
And to keep that open.
And I think that actually, perhaps you may need to use tools to help you communicate that you didn't have to use before. Maybe if you're talking about the grandchildren, you'll need to use a photo album to point to them, to show them that that's who you're talking about. Maybe you'll need to, I don't know, say if you want to say, do you want chicken or pork? Get the chicken and pork out and let them point to the one that they want. But I think if they're still getting to make an active choice and a decision, that isn't patronizing, that's empowering.
Okay.
I'd say.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
Number 7, I keep on getting really frustrated with my partner. He has mild stage dementia, which means that he's fairly independent. I work from home, and he keeps on walking into the room and asking me the same questions over and over again. It's driving me crazy. It's like he doesn't listen to my answers. I even shouted at him the other day and felt really bad about it. What can I do to help him understand me?
Yeah. So I think that that's maybe quite similar to the question before in terms of how you might support someone to understand you. And I think here it's worth thinking about what the different things that are probably going on that make it difficult for him to remember the information that you've given him. So maybe he hasn't understood in the first place. Maybe his memory difficulties are meaning that he can't keep that information in his head. And maybe his processing speed is really slow, that if he was given that information quite quickly, he can't hold on to it. So maybe that's why we're getting him coming in back and forth. And that can be incredibly frustrating. And I think you're not on your own, I would say, for getting angry and frustrated and shouting. I think it happens all the time. I guess to think about how you can make him understand, that will be the same sort of things that we've talked about previously, like making sure your environment's really good, keep the topic that you're talking about, keep what you're saying short, keep it concise, make sure that you're using those visual things as we talked about, and also thinking about how you're giving that information. We talked about nonverbals, and I'm going to bring it up again, but if you're really tense, he'll probably be tense, and it may lead to an argument, and that's maybe not good for anyone. So just doing as much as you can there to keep it calm and things like that, and give yourself a break if you need to.
Speaking with you makes me think about registering nonverbals in other people just in daily life. So I think you're raising my consciousness.
Yes.
Do you do that? Are you particularly acute about reading people's body language because of your work?
I think you just get used to kind of seeing that as part of someone's communication, because you will be doing it unconsciously. You'll be doing it. You'll be looking at me and thinking, your brain will be thinking, she's leaning forward in her chair, she's engaged in our conversation, she's got a bit of a smile on, so she's obviously enjoying the conversation that we're having. I can look at you and say the same. So it's not that I'm not, maybe I do it more consciously because of my job, but you're still doing it. Yeah. And in dementia, if everything else has become more difficult, if understanding the world around you has become really confusing, often they can be really good at that, and they can really absorb.
And skills can be developed that can be useful for communication with everybody.
Exactly. And one of the other things I would just add there as well is just to consider kind of writing it down. If it's one thing that you keep coming back to, do think about, right, I'm going to sit down with my husband and we're going to talk about this thing, having that conversation, being really honest and saying, now sometimes you might forget, how do you want me to remind you? Getting that down, getting pictures on there, making sure it's nice and clear, and then that's maybe something that you can refer back to.
And then that becomes a mutual thing as well. It becomes, as you said, empowering. It involves the other person. It's not imposed on them.
Exactly. Sometimes you actually, it's something called a social story. That's the name for this thing. And it was developed first for children with autism as a way of teaching them about kind of but boundaries. And say there was a kid that would go into the playground and would always punch someone else in the face. You would sit down with them and you would write a social story with them and say, right, so how is it that we're going to remember that you don't punch someone in the face? And you would kind of write that script together so it's in their words. They could draw a picture about it. They could put photos on it. They could do whatever they want, and it's there to remind them. And if it happens again, you would just prompt them. And the theory is that that would then become something that they learn and becomes part of the routine.
A scripted and illustrated story that enables positive change.
That feels like you. It has to feel authentic. Like the person. Yeah, can't just be something that someone else wants to give to them.
Okay, thank you. 8. Is it better to take my cues, so to speak, in terms of where a conversation might go from the person with dementia, or is it okay to lead the conversation? In other words, can topics be introduced, or I guess I'm guessing that you might say that it's just about having natural communication, and if you want to introduce something, you do. But does that question speak to you at all?
Yeah, I think what I came away thinking about that was just both. It depends what you want from the situation. Sometimes if you have a particular thing you want to ask them, or a particular thing you want to talk about, then introducing it can be really helpful. And having structured topics, as I kind of mentioned before, can actually be really good at anchoring the conversation. And if the person needs more information about the world around them, you giving them the topic can actually be quite helpful sometimes. But then it maybe shouldn't always be the case. It should maybe be natural and fluid, and giving them the chance to talk or not talk. Because actually, to have a nice interaction with someone, you actually don't need to be talking. And if the person finds that difficult, you can just be listening to a piece of music together. You could be watching an old film together. You could be, you could be playing a game of cards with each other. You don't need to be talking to each other and doing something that they might find difficult. You can do anything.
I think that's a really important point. I have another friend whose husband was ill, and we were talking about his care, and because she was his carer, and that sometimes the image of poor, lonely whomever sitting in the chair by themselves, but sometimes sitting in the chair by yourself with your memories or whatever you're doing, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's perfectly acceptable, and it doesn't have to be verbal, nonverbal, there can be stillness and quiet and relaxed moments where nothing is going on because a lot of other things are going on.
Yeah, and I guess as dementia progresses, you might find that people are talking less, and they might find it really hard to respond to you in conversation. And actually, then it's thinking about conversation in a bit more of an abstract way. It's thinking about how are we going to maintain our relationship, and often that can be doing things together. If you think about your partner or your friend, you wouldn't talk, maybe you would, I don't know, maybe I probably do, but you don't always talk non-stop all the time. You can sit and watch something together, or not, flick through a magazine, look at a photo album, I don't know, whatever it is that you do.
It's not all based on words, or
exactly.
or it's yeah. 9. My mom has been in her care home for a couple of years now. She has fairly advanced Alzheimer's dementia. Initially, we took her out and about for coffee, meals, etc. But now it's difficult as she's very frail and worries a lot if we take her out. We recently took her out for her birthday to afternoon tea, but she spilled her tea and felt so embarrassed. I hate seeing her sitting in her chair looking lost and sad when I go to visit her. We used to speak daily, and now our conversations are forced. How can I communicate with her when she's so difficult to engage with? I want to let her know I'm here for her, but how?
So I guess that's kind of what we were actually just talking about, really, isn't it? In terms of, as dementia progresses, we do see that people find it more difficult to find the words and find it more difficult to be in social situations. And I wonder whether a big, loud situation with lots of different people talking at once, lots of things going on, lots of stimulus, lots of things coming at you, that your brain is having a really hard time interpreting, perhaps just felt a bit much for her mum. So maybe thinking about, can you do some of those nice things together? They're lovely, those things, sound absolutely lovely. Can you do some of those things together in a quieter way, in a way with less distractions? Could you bring it to her? Could you
take care with the environment?
Exactly, look after the environment. So think, okay, so I want to do afternoon tea. Maybe we're going to bring that to her so that we know that there's going to be no background music, or that we know there's not going to be everyone chattering on all the different tables. And maybe we just agree amongst the family that we're going to talk one at a time, and talk really clearly and concisely so that she can be as involved in that as possible. Or it might be at the point that isn't able to say very much at all. So being with her, being around her, I think you are showing her that you do care and that you want to be there for her. And I think, that's when you can communicate a lot non-verbally. How does she look? How is she feeling? How you can, even touch is a really amazing thing. It can be in dementia, to show someone that you're there for them.
And noticing that, as this person says, noticing that somebody is looking lost or sad, which is the nonverbals.
Exactly, she's already doing it, which is great. Yeah, so just thinking about, how can I adjust the environment to support her? How can we all change our communication to reduce the load, basically, just give her the best possible chance of being able to participate. And I think, that doesn't have to be a big event. It can be small little things as well. Yeah.
Excellent.
Fab.
All right, we are at number 10, and the final question. My husband has vascular dementia and recently suffered a stroke. This has had a major impact on his mobility. To make matters worse, he doesn't remember the stroke. He has all the things to help him: wheelchair, cushions, Zimmer frame, special sliding sheets. And the physio has visited and explained things to him, but he just doesn't seem to get it. A nurse even explained to him the other day, and then 10 minutes later, he was talking about walking around the shops the next day. He needs 2 carers to even get out of bed. I don't know what to do or say. Help.
Yeah. So this is something that we've actually seen quite a lot of, that you might see as someone gets older, that they've got 2 things that happen at once. And both of those things can affect people's memory. And both of those things, the dementia and the stroke, can affect somebody's insight, so how much they understand about what's difficult for them and what isn't difficult for them. And it may well be that the stroke has affected how he how aware he is of what he can and can't do. And that can be a really very frustrating thing for families and for the person as well, because they think, well, I can walk, so why are you all keeping me here in bed? So I guess there's maybe two ways of dealing with this. The first is just to think about, is he trying to get out of bed? Is he trying to actually get up and out? Because if he is trying to get up and out and he needs two people to help him, he actually might need quite a lot of supervision, and the nurses might need to adjust to their schedules to be there to keep prompting him and keep reminding him. You can print out visuals that just kind of a symbol with a person walking with a line through it kind of thing, and have that really near him so that that can be a jolt to the memory. But if he's maybe not trying to get out of bed, it's maybe more a conversation of how you deal with it conversationally. And then perhaps that's about thinking about, well, how important is it that he understands that's the situation, and how important is it that he feels okay and that you're able to move the conversation on and have a nice interaction with each other. And I guess what I would say there is that, you know, if you've tried to give him the information and he's not been able to take it on, it may be a case that arguing with him back and forth is not going to help. And perhaps it's something that you maybe just need to kind of go, yeah, okay. Do you remember when we went on for that walk here? And kind of move the conversation on to kind of talking about something else.
Redirect it.
Yeah. And I think it's that difficulty that often people have when they think he needs to know exactly what's going on. And often actually that can be a barrier to conversation. That can break it down because you just get stuck on that point and can't go anywhere with it. But actually, if there's a way of kind of moving the conversation onto something else, redirecting that person, that might be easier. Writing it down, visuals and stuff like that might help it be less frustrating as well for the carers and people around.
So we've thank you. We've reached the end of our list of questions. This has been both educational and informative and delightful. Is there anything? I was thinking ways of summing this up. I would say patience, sensitivity to yourself and to the person you're looking after.
Don't be too hard on yourself.
Focusing, not having lots of noise and distractions necessarily, if you can manage that, especially when you're trying to communicate important things.
Exactly.
Shared time and being relaxed together as well, enjoying time together.
Yeah.
Looking after oneself. The visual aids, the writing things down, scripting,
pictures, those kind of things.
Photographs. Anything else? What else? What else do they need to know?
Yeah, I know. I guess the other thing is just, and you did kind of say this, but just keep it simple. Instead of, I'm gonna just pop to the kitchen because I'm gonna get a cup of tea and I might grab a biscuit. I'm going to the kitchen to get tea and biscuit. Keep it as that. Much easier, much less faff. Right. Keep it as simple as you can. And I think that those things are really important. And I'm sure everyone is doing a very good job anyway, and it can be very frustrating, but carry on.
So thank you, watchers who sent
thank you.
questions in, and thank you for those who didn't send questions in but might have more. I'm sure there will be lots of information available on this website and elsewhere, and from Hackney City Carers. And thank you, Helena Thornley, SLT, speech language therapist. It's been fun.
Good. It has been fun. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.